right. Well, happy Halloween and welcome everyone to the American Cetacean Society San Francisco Bay Chapter's October 2025 speaker event. And I'm Susan Hopp, board member responsible for our speaker program. And with me is fellow board member Firuze Gocha. Now, for anyone new to the American Cetacean Society, we are a chapter within a national organization that is the oldest nonprofit dedicated to the protection of whales, dolphins, porpoises, and their habitat. And we do this through education, community engagement, and awarding grants towards cetacean research. And it is your donations that truly support our mission and enable us to put on our monthly talks, create our online courses, and give research grants. And it's easy to donate on our website if you haven't at the time of registration. Before we go into our talk, we have an exciting announcement, and that is that we are planning our first in-person event since COVID. It will be a celebration of our community of cetacean lovers, and we'd love to see as many of you as possible. Please mark your calendars for Saturday afternoon, November 22nd. It will be at the Marine Mammal Center in Sausalito. It should be really fun. We're going to have our Marine Mammal Center Conservation Director, Kathy George, speaking. And other details will follow, but it should be really fun. And it's really a day of appreciation for what brings us together. Okay, but for tonight, we are recording our presentation. Please put your questions in the Q&A. That's better than the chat. And we will field them after the presentation. So tonight's talk is Southeast Alaska, the splendor and magic of the Inside Passage. Our speaker is really one of I consider Jodi a regular, and certainly one of our most popular. So photographer Jodi Frediani is taking us to the Inside Passage of Alaska, an area that she knows very well from pretty much annual summer voyages. Jodi is based in Santa Cruz. Her photographic adventures have taken her around the world: Africa, Alaska, Argentina, Antarctica, Brazil, Norway, Siberia, South Georgia, Thailand, Tonga, and to the Dominican Republic, where for 23 years she has been swimming with and photographing humpback whales on the Silver Bank. Her work has appeared in a number of national and international publications, including the BBC's Nature's Weirdest Events and Carl Safina's National Geographic blog, Ocean Views. She has won prestigious awards in multiple international photo competitions, including Nature Photographer of the Year, sponsored by the London Natural History Museum, and the Big Picture competition sponsored by the California Academy of Sciences. And in addition to photographing wildlife in its many forms and habitats, Jodi's humpback whale research has resulted in multiple published papers. And in the last year, she launched her book, Wild Monterey Bay, an anthology of stories of memorable encounters, truly a celebration of Monterey Bay, which she calls the Serengeti of the ocean. And it's a great book. I recommend it for Christmas presents. And we're going to hear, I think, more about that, but focusing on Alaska right now. So Jodi, thank you so much for being here. And we hand it over to you.
Well, thank you, Susan, for the introduction. And here we go. And I'm delighted to be here with people I'm sure who have been to Alaska with me besides you. And before I get started taking us on this virtual journey, I just want to kind of fill you in a little bit on my relationship to Alaska. I had wanted to go for quite a long time, couldn't figure out what boat to go on, how to do that. And by asking friends and researchers, everybody at that time in 2015 pointed to a beautiful yacht, the Northern Song, that was owned at the time by Dennis Rogers, and went up with a friend. We spent, a week on board. We actually encouraged Dennis to take us to some place that he didn't usually go because we'd heard that whales are bubble net feeding there. And at the end of that trip, he dropped me off at the Five Finger Lighthouse. I spent 3 weeks there, and I have been going back in the summer since 2021 and every year since. So I know a lot more about whales than I do about Alaska. Alaska is a very large state, as I'm sure you are all very aware. And I've been to a small portion of it, but I've gone back repeatedly because it has captured my heart. And let's see if we can do that. So just to locate us, most of the trips that I have been on have started in Juneau, which is up here in, I hope you can see my cursor circled in red. And Juneau is a really interesting city. It's situated on the Gastineau Channel and at the base of a very tall mountain. And beyond that mountain are glaciers and more peaks, and then Canada. And the Gastineau Channel actually connects the various portions of the inside passage that we'll be traveling. We may go down Stevens Passage on the eastern side, Frederick Sound to the south, Chatham Strait to our west, and then we would go back up again. And the whale icons that you see here are from special encounters that we had this last summer on a voyage, and the yellow dots were the anchorages where we spent each night, including Cake down there in red, which was another harbor. The other anchorages are either small bays or coves that are very protected. So just to give you an idea, not all trips that I've been on have followed the same route, but they've been in the same areas of the inside passage. I don't know. And to me, the landscape of Southeast Alaska is absolutely spectacular and seems to encompass the four elements. So you've got Earth in the small islands, you've got the majestic mountains with their ragged peaks. Then, of course, the air is alive. The light can be absolutely incredible with the backdrops. And water is everywhere. It's in the sea, it's in the fog, the clouds, it's in the blow of the whales. And sometimes, but not always, fire becomes a part of that as well. And in this case, the fire was actually burning in the forests of British Columbia, and the smoke had come, west. And while it wasn't particularly healthy environment, wasn't that bad for us, but it led to absolutely spectacular sunsets. And I have always liked to try and find the beauty even in the dark portions of nature. And I know that those fires were really problematic for British Columbia forests that have been ravaged by beetles and probably clear cutting before that. The last photo is taken from the Cake Harbor. This is also after sunset in the Cake Harbor, the beautiful pastel colors. And even at nighttime, this was from one of our anchorages at full moon, and you can see how protected it is. The waters are calm. It's just a very magical place. But I don't go for the landscapes. That's kind of, what was it? Come for the whatever and stay for the pie, or come for the pie and stay. Anyways, it's the whales that bring me there. And this is what is known as a picket fence. Not that the whales care, but there are almost, nearly a dozen whales here who all surfaced at the same time to exhale. They had been feeding in a bubble net feeding group. You can see the spectacular landscape that frames all of this. For those of you locally who've been to Monterey Bay, while we have wonderful whale watching and dolphin watching there, the backdrop is not nearly as spectacular as what we have here in Southeast Alaska. For me, the cooperative bubble net feeding is sort of the crown jewel, and it's what I hope to see every time I go, even if I'm going for some other reason. And I've worn a number of different hats, and I'll talk about those later on in the presentation. But the whales have developed this wonderful way of working together. Sometimes they're close to shore, sometimes they're further out on the channel. In either case, they have sorted it out so that they are not interfering with one another. And I know that Ari Friedlander and John Kalambakidis have tagged whales feeding in Monterey Bay on anchovies. Whales in Alaska are feeding on herring, and they were surprised because they've also studied the whales up in Alaska, that in Monterey Bay they would see a whale with a camera on its back, rising to the surface with a small bait ball above it, and the next thing another whale would come in and actually push it out of the way. And they are thinking that perhaps it's because anchovies are um, a recent prey species in the bay, and they haven't figured out how to work together yet. But besides the cooperative group feeding, sometimes we might see individual whales. And this was a solitary humpback feeding at the base of the Five Finger Lighthouse Island in 2015. That was my first time there. And you can see it blew its own bubble net. The remnants of the bubbles are still there. To the left of its mouth is its pec fin that you can see underwater. And it's using a slightly different strategy. We were able to, by creating nets, because we didn't have any nets, ultimately catch some of the fish that this whale was feeding on, and they were juvenile herring. And we guessed that they were very naive and weren't schooling together the way the adults do. And so this whale came up and sort of left its mouth open as a bit of a basin, using its pec fins to herd the fish in, and then slowly closing it part way, so as not to scare the fish. And then you can see the water spilling out of the sides of its jaw there. And I'm going to show you this, which includes audio from our captain on the Glacier Seal, and you'll learn more about that boat later. It's his audio track. He puts a hydrophone in the water, so that we can hear the feeding call and then see the whales, then know to look for the whales coming up somewhere, not necessarily where we think they're going to. So I want you'll hear the feeding call, and then I want you to watch as the bubble net forms, and then be amazed as the whales come up.
Right here.
I don't know about you, but to me, this is a pretty spectacular event to watch. They don't have knives and forks. They've got to figure out their own strategy to capture fish to feed, and it's amazing. But this next video is something that I'm going to guess nobody on this Zoom has seen. I know I've seen it once in my life, and that's what was in this video. And I didn't see it very well because I was trying to take photographs and I missed it all. But I want you to be patient, because you're going to see something known as a dissociation event. But it's quite amazing. The audio track was added. I'll tell you more about it once it quiets down a little bit. His audio track was overlaid. The whales were not making these social sounds at the time. And the footage was taken by Don Vermant, who was captain and co-owner of a beautiful yacht, the Blue Pearl, along with his wife Denise. And they sometimes made their vessel available to researchers to do work. So this is called a dissociation event. The whales have been feeding together for maybe several days, and now they were getting ready to disperse. It's also quite reminiscent of killer whales celebration after they've had a successful hunt. And in the interest of time, I'm going to move on from here. But I don't know about you. I've never seen that many whales breaching at the same time. So this next clip is a different feeding strategy using a bubble net. And this was also taken down in Frederick Sound, which was where the last feeding video I showed. And this is a solitary humpback whale feeding on krill and blowing its own bubble net. And the Alaska Whale Foundation and University of Hawaii recently published a paper on this strategy. They found that the whales are able to manipulate the number of rotations that they make, the distance of the bubbles from the outer circle to the inner one, and that they are able to actually capture 7 times more prey this way, but they only use this strategy when the krill densities are low. And this is normal speed. It's not slowed down. It's not slow motion. So you can see the whale is moving very methodically to create a net to corral the krill and come up with a mouthful. So I'd never seen this before, which I guess means I've seen individuals feeding on krill in Southeast Alaska. I guess while this was absolutely beautiful to watch, it's not necessarily a good sign for the whales because it means there was less krill, but they were still doing a great job of actually feeding themselves. And this is to give you an overview. There's the glacier seal, the boat we were on and that I've been on most of the time I've been in Southeast Alaska. There's a different whale feeding, blowing a bubble net to feed on krill. And the boat's dead in the water. We sat there for at least an hour, if not several hours. And we would see these whales pop up over here and over there. And Tanya Pastrano, a friend who was on, excuse me, on the vessel with me this summer, noticed that a nearby mother and calf were feeding together, and the mother would blow a bubble net and she and the calf would come up together. And then shortly after that, the mother blew a bubble net and fed on her own, and the calf blew a bubble net and fed on its own. So we may have watched the first time this calf was able to successfully feed itself with a bubble net. That calf afterwards was seen rolling around in the surf, not in the surf, but in the sea. And it wasn't until I looked at my drone footage that I could see there was a very small piece of kelp it would catch on its pectoral fin, then it would catch on its head. This is a different calf from 2023 who is also what we call as kelping. And in this case, mom was nearby. And it appears to be an incredibly sensual experience. Sometimes we call it, going to the spa. We've seen gray whales do it coming up from Baja along the Big Sur coast. We see killer whales carrying kelp on their backs. And I think the fact that the whales are able to engage with it perhaps misleads them and makes it more likely that they would get entangled in fishing gear. But at this point, mom seems to be saying, okay, you've done a great job. You've taken your bath for the day or scrub, and now we're going to leave. And she blows a beautiful rain blow for us as they take off. So what else do whales do in Southeast Alaska? The same thing they do other places. They breach and they breach and they breach some more. And as you saw, sometimes 8 of them will breach at the same time. And as I said, I missed every single one of those because they never breached in the same place. These made it a little more predictable. And here's the calf that I mentioned from this summer after playing in the kelp. It did a great breach at a distance from us and then proceeded to do a series of these head breaches, approaching the boat, blowing a little series of bubble bursts as it did so. And then it finally got very close to us and then eyes wide open and then swam under the boat. So, we get tail throws, we get tail lobs, and it's basically humpback whales with the bubble net feeding thrown in. We sometimes are fortunate and get to see killer whales as well. And this was in, I believe it's Keku Strait outside of Cake, down in the more southern area. And these whales are part of the AF and AG pod of resident killer whales. Thank you to Jill Hine, who got the information, the IDs from Dan Olson with the North Gulf Oceanic Society. Captain Mark and I saw these whales at a little bit of a distance, and then the whales came over to do some people watching. So when I've been in Southeast Alaska, I've worn quite a number of different hats, at least for the short periods that I've been there. And one of those is as a whale researcher with the Whale SETI research team. We engaged in interspecies communication research. For those who don't know SETI, that stands for Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence. It's a well-recognized organization that has been working towards identifying intelligent life in outer space. And the Whale SETI group figures that if we study extraterrestrial species here on planet Earth, and that includes whales who are living in a watery element and not on Earth, that we may be able to help identify features that will help recognize when sounds coming from space are actually from intelligent beings. And in 2021, I was out for 3 weeks. First week on the Blue Pearl, I mentioned Don, who got that beautiful drone footage of the breaching whales. And the two photos on the left are from the Blue Pearl, his vessel. These are most of my team members, is Brenda McCowan on the left, Fred Sharp, with Brenda up on top, Debbie Collier behind, and then on the bottom lower right, again, is Fred Sharp and Lawrence Doyle. Missing from these photos is Josephine Hubbard, who is a postdoc and has worked with Brenda McCowan in her lab. And I'm going to show you this clip of the playback study, the successful playback experiment that we did in 2021 happened on the second week of our voyage. And then I'll talk a little bit more about it after you get a chance to see this clip. And it looks like this. You'll notice that none of us on the boat were actually talking. Twain is a female humpback whale you just saw. So
Are we supposed to be hearing any sounds then?
did you not hear them?
No, we didn't hear them.
Oh no. How do we? Oh, Susan, does that mean you haven't heard anything on any of the videos? Did you even hear the feeding call earlier?
Um, Maybe not. The visuals were so great, but that it was pretty clear. So
Oh,
no, I guess we haven't heard. But we heard when we were doing the practice, we heard something, so I don't maybe um maybe turn up your volume?
My volume's turned up to, I'll turn it up a tad more. Um, it says MacBook Pro microphone. You know what? I'm going to go back because
Okay.
you really, oops, not going backwards. Why is it not? How do I get it to go back?
Oh,
Uh, oh, let's put my cursor here. Okay.
okay, now we are. Yeah.
Yeah, I really want you to be able to hear this. So I'm gonna,
S-
so you're
We're not
not
hearing, we're
hearing
not hearing anything. Go.
no, because there's nothing to hear at the moment.
Okay.
Did you hear that?
Not really, no.
Okay. Well, that's unfortunate. I don't know what's missing, the audio. Okay. So you'll have to hear me talk about it, and I
Okay.
did
Yeah.
hear some audio earlier, so I'm not sure what's going on. But basically, what we did is we had been out the first week, getting set up, testing the equipment, and doing some playback of various sounds into the water and getting no response. And our second week, one day we decided we had about 8 whales feeding off to the side of where we were, and my team members decided that they would record some of their contact calls. And contact calls, otherwise known as whoop calls or throp calls, are believed to be used by humpbacks to stay in touch with their, the other whales in the area. And they're heard in all the populations. And it's kind of, I can't really do a good one, but like throp. And so when my team members recorded these calls, they had one that was very high quality. And they thought, well, let's play this back the next day. And so the following day, we were 3 miles to the east and followed a very specific protocol. So Brenda McCowan and another team member were in the cabin and they at the computers, and they were blind to what was going on outside. On the bow and on the top deck, we had photographers, videographer, and other observers, paying attention to any whales that might be in the vicinity. And there was initially one whale who did which you can see in this illustration, did a head lunge, lunge feeding lunge over here. And for the first 20 minutes, we simply listened. We had a hydrophone and a speaker in the water, but we were just listening. And then the second 20 minutes, we began to play the exemplar or the whip call that had been recorded the day before into the water. And I believe we played it 3 times, and on the third time, we got a response from this whale. And for the next 20 minutes, she swam and surfaced everywhere you see you see a whale icon there. And apparently, looked like she swam around the boat. You can see the speakers. We've got 2 speakers here. We've got a hydrophone on each side. And for 33 times, she responded when we played the whoop call to her. And we know that it's a female named Twain who is about 35 years old because of the fluke ID that I was able to get and we put into Happy Whale. And it turns out that, oh, and at the end of the 20 minutes, we had to stop the playbacks and listen again. And Twain called 2 more times. And when she didn't get a response, she left. So that's a simplified version of it. The paper you can see on the left was published with a lot more detail on all of that. And it turned out another interesting aspect of this is that Twain was present the day before when we recorded the call. So it's very likely that she was listening to her own voice or listening to that was clearly was listening to that of one of her friends. And um, it was a pretty basic attempt at a conversation where it was more like hello, 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 hello. And the only parameters that Brenda was able to manipulate at all because of the software she had was latency or the period between playing each call. And so she would do that and she would change the timing and then Twain would match the timing. And that kind of matching has been looked at with humans as one of the factors that we would talk about as a conversation. So it was a very exciting thing that occurred, successful playback, and we're hoping to do more of that in the future with improved software so we can change some of the other factors, vocal factors. So another hat I wore was in 2022. I was invited out on the glacier seal to be an advisor to a Japanese NHK documentary honoring Michio Hoshino, who was a very famous Japanese photographer. He had come over to Alaska in the 1970s when he was a young man. He went to the University of Alaska in Anchorage, and then got married and stayed on. And in the film days, he photographed the caribou herds, the caribou migration, the landscape, the bears, the whales, was down in Southeast Alaska. And if you see obviously you see the fluke photo on the left, that is a whale named Cornucopia, and it was photographed by Michio in, I believe, in the 1980s, and that whale is still alive today. And we saw that whale, and we saw several others that Michio had photographed. The reason they were doing this documentary is that in the 1996, I think, Michio was on assignment in Kamchatka in eastern Russia, and he was dragged from his tent by a grizzly bear and killed. He was 44 years old. It was quite tragic. And I think that, for the 70th anniversary, of his life, the NHK was doing this documentary series. And so we had a film crew with us. You can see them in the skiff, getting some footage of the whales out there. And here they are on the glacier seal. Fred Sharp was actually had the good fortune to spend some time with Michio when he was in Alaska, studying, photographing the whales. And you can see the crew there, and the fellow on the left photos in the plaid is a man named Hidehiro Otaki, who is a modern day Japanese photographer who was inspired by Michio, and he was sort of, they were reliving the kinds of experiences that Michio had, and Fred is talking on camera to them, and then of course, we have to celebrate, just like the whales. And Clark Snodgrass, who you'll see in the next slide, has a Japanese friend who taught him all about sake celebration. And Clark brought a bunch of sake along in little square dishes. And of course, there's Mark Choquette, our captain, thoroughly enjoying this party with the Japanese. Here we have a little bit more. There's Hide filming, and his other two guys, his sound guy, his video guy. I'm in there taking photographs. And the bottom image is a screen grab from the documentary. That's Fred Sharp, Clark Snodgrass, and myself. And there's a laptop we're looking at. And I was actually giving some commentary on the photos that Hide had taken. So in 2020, it was 2022. In 2023, Mark contacted me. He had an Australian couple who were filmmaker team, and they were going to be in Alaska for a month, and they wanted to go see bubblenet feeding whales and go out on his boat, but they couldn't afford the full boat charter fee. So Mark asked if I could round up, some more people to, cover the cost. And I did, including myself and including Cherie Tamura, who is actually standing next to Mark. Mark and his lovely wife, Dory, are there on the far right. And then Cherie, and between Cherie and me, I'm in the blue vest, is Ben, who's our deckhand. And then Colette, next to me in the bright blue, is a wonderful chef and a great entertainment. She's pretty funny, and she lives in Juneau, as does Mark and Dory, and she fronts her own band, and she manages the indie theater in Juneau. And then we've got the rest of our crew this time, or I should say our guests, including Joanne Lasnier, one of your members, who's sitting down there on the bottom. And those are the folks who are on the boat this year. There's Joanne up on the left celebrating a birthday. There's Colette telling some kind of a joke, who knows? Sandy Zimmerman is in the back. We had two birthdays that week. It was really fun. And on the right, we've got Cherie Tamura, Joanne Lasnier eating second breakfast. And, Colette wants to make sure we don't go hungry. So first breakfast might be, yogurt and granola. And if you're smart, you don't fill up on that because then you never know what kind of quiche or French toast or something is going to come out of the oven, and sausage and bacon, the whole thing. And then, we'll have snack, and then we'll have lunch, and then we'll have another snack. And then, there's one of the dinners, which is on the left, which is, you know, salmon. So we stay fed. And we look for whales. We see whales as often as we can, but it's a good travel from Juneau down to the whale to down towards Frederick Sound, which is where we usually find most of the whales. And we may engage in other fun activities along the way. On the bottom left photo is Lisa Utal. You'll see more about her later. And she is trying to get some footage of the plumose anemones in the Cake Harbor. Tanya Pastrano there is making sure that Lisa doesn't go for an unexpected swim. On the bottom right is Cherie and Jill Hine, who are taking advantage of the kayaks. We get to kayak in the evening when we're in the anchorage. In the top right, there is Lisa, who is a plankton specialist, and she brought a small microscope that we worked really hard to hook up to an iPhone at any rate, and we're looking at the plankton, and you'll get to see some of that in a few moments. Whoops. So I said plumose anemones. Cake Harbor is an interesting place. A lot of the boats are perhaps in a derelict state. They haven't been out in a while. And so the water in many of the slips is fairly calm, and these anemones grow to great size on the side of the docks. We'll also see lion's mane jelly, and they sometimes get caught by those anemones. The one on the top right is basically almost finished. It's a skeletal form. It's lost its oral arms. It's lost most of its tentacles, but it's a gelatinous creature, but you can see the incredible intricacy of the structure. And then you've got a healthy live one on the left. We sometimes see them out at sea, and they can be very large, like a couple of feet across. And then there are bald eagles. And I will confess, like the 8 breaching whales, repeat it one after another, I have only seen a Christmas tree of adult and juvenile bald eagles like this once, but we always see eagles. They're part of Alaska. And there's an adult on the left with a fish, and then on the right, we've got a juvenile who is giving me the evil eye. And here is a poor juvenile that was on Five Finger at the lighthouse on the island there in 2015. And there's a nest that the pair come back to each year. And this bird may have taken its first flight at that point in time in this drizzle and landed on the rocky shore and got so drenched it had a hard time. Had to take a while to dry out before it could get back to its nest. An unhappy, elegant, but bedraggled eagle. And I keep talking about the lighthouse. There's a glimpse of it on its own little island. The eagle's nest is somewhere in the middle of that bit of forest, and you can see the spectacular backdrop in the background with, snow and sometimes glaciers. So there are other birds, and I've just, in the interest of time, just put in a couple of the less common birds that we see. The pigeon guillemot on the left with a fish, and we're not quite sure what kind that was. A kingfisher. We have lots of gulls, laughing gulls, and terns and other birds. And then, of course, they're bears. And this was a sow with 2 cubs that we saw. I believe that was probably in 2021 in Pavlov Harbor, which I haven't been to since, but there's a stream that comes down and a good place to see bears. But this year, when we were in Cake for a couple of nights, and then we fueled up, so we were at the fuel dock, and most of us got off the boat and we walked into up to the highway, and then we walked a little short ways till we came to a local, stream, river, and that's noted for bear activity. And lo and behold, within 5 minutes, this sow came down, this black bear, to the river, and just like that, she caught herself a chum salmon. Um, it's almost the size of the bear, and she brought it back up onto the shore where her two cubs were waiting, and then she went into the forest with them. I'm sure to avoid other bears, because we saw two more bears while we were there, and avoid the crows that were very anxious, I'm sure, to engage in scraps. And we had a second bear encounter, and remember, we're looking for whales, but we're more than happy to see bears. When we got back to Juneau at the end of our eighth day out on the water, we got back midday, and we had enough time that I took everybody up to see the Mendenhall Glacier. And crazy people that we were, we decided we would first go to the stream and see if there were any bears. The glacier could wait. And as we're walking across the parking lot, Tanya's, yelling at me to run. And I go, why? And she said, well, everybody else is running, hurry. And we get over there, and this big sow has just come over to the bank of the river. There's a bridge that crosses it. I say river, it's more like a large stream. And she's waiting for her three cubs to show up. And show up they do. And I think I'm smart, go off to the side where this one is feeding on salad before the main course. Its siblings were there as well. Only thing was that once the sow went into the water and caught a salmon for them, I was now sort of crowded out by all the people who are on the rail. So I'm at a bit of a distance and did my best to grab a photo of two of the siblings feeding on the fish that mom had caught for them. And I hope you can hear this, but it sounds like maybe you can't. So you'll just have to watch, and I'll make some terrible noises. These bears, this is the sow and her three cubs, and they're feeding on this salmon, I guess it's a sockeye, and they're squealing and communicating. And I've never heard bears communicate before, and it boggled my mind. Can you hear them, Susan?
Um, yeah, there's some sound, but not, I think, in what you're hoping for.
It gets a little louder for a minute, and then I'll attempt to. Multiple voices. And, this kid thinks it can steal the whole fish. And I thought it was interesting that there was very little, threat going on. Although I think at one point somebody grabbed the salmon back. But yeah, it was a very special encounter. And, shortly after this, the sow goes back down into the water, makes a half-hearted failed attempt to catch another salmon. Oops. Missed that one. And, and then the whole family sort of walked downstream, and shortly after they see cub coming around here. I think some of the fish had been dragged over there earlier. And then, we went downstream and tried to keep track of them. Here we've got a couple of views. The little brown cub is giving me a side eye, and one of the others had an itch and was scratching itself on that log. And then the whole family walked off down a road back into the woods. And I want to talk about the fish for a moment, because salmon are kind of the lifeblood of the forest. And I say that, the plankton obviously are really important to the salmon. We'll learn about them in a second. But here is a female sockeye on the left, and she is, I should say, we did go see the glacier after this, but she's creating a red. which is a nest, and she's using her tail to remove the sediment that may have settled in the gravel. The male is on the right waiting, and once she clears the gravel and deposits her eggs, he deposits his milt, and it's in a riffle, which means that the water is, continuing to slowly to travel over the gravel and the rocks here and aerate the eggs so that they can survive and the turn into little fish who ultimately make their way out to the ocean and then come back to their home stream. And we saw they feed the eagles, they feed the bears, they feed, all the other wildlife. And I'm going to show you one more clip. This is from a little bit further south. Mendenhall Glacier is just north of the town of Juneau, the city of Juneau. This is north of Lemon Cove, which is a northern suburb of Juneau. And these are chum salmon. You can see many of them are spawned out. After salmon spawn, they die. And yet there's still some latecomers who are going to be heading upstream to a more appropriate area. This is a bit of a pool to lay their eggs. And in addition to feeding the wildlife, the salmon feed the forest. And this is a bear from probably 2015 actually, at a hatchery. And they don't always lick their plates. So there's bits and left over. They make it into the soil. The skeletons sometimes end up in the creek, but back on land. The eagle flies off with its salmon and drops bits here and there and then poops out into the forest. The bears may take their salmon away from the stream edge, and even if they don't take them too far, they poop out as well. And studies have been done that show the nitrogen, much of the nitrogen in the forest, in the trees themselves, has a signature of having been out in the ocean. And that's thanks to the wonderful ways of the natural ecosystem. So what else do we get to see? Sometimes we see Dall's porpoise. And here in Monterey Bay, you've got Dulls because you see this rooster tail of spray. They're zipping along so fast. In Alaska, when I've seen them, they've been going much slower. This one is bow riding. You get to see the dorsal fin of them. And on the right, not my best photo, but a very special encounter for me was my first and only sighting of a porcupine. And that was, I think, a couple years ago, maybe it was last year, at the same creek where we had that first bear with her two cubs. It was pretty cool to see a porcupine in the wild. We've had river otters. That's up in Teneke off of Chatham Strait. We've been there in the past. We'll often see the northern sea otter. Looks like our southern sea otter. And that's a female with the scarring on her nose from mating. We get to see stellar sea lions. We do get to see regular sea lions, not terribly many, but Mark likes to take us to haul out on the Brothers Islands, which are quite near the Five Finger Island. And, we get to hear them making a ruckus and see them jousting with one another. And I mentioned the plankton and the microscope you saw earlier. And here's Lisa Utal, who I think works for NOAA, or she did before the shutdown. And she's doing a plankton tow. And she did one every place that we stopped where there were whales. And this was in our last anchorage before we got back to Juneau. And she found that everywhere she took this plankton samples, except for this last one, she saw the same plankton each time. And I'm gonna study plankton in my next lifetime. Last time I had an opportunity to see, what's living in the ocean, that we can't see. I was completely amazed. This zooplankton on the left is called it's a veliger larva, and that means it's a larva for gastropod types, including the snail that you see on the right. And if you'd ever asked me that's what a snail larva would look like, I would not have come close. Dr. Seuss did a much better job than I did. Here's phytoplankton. We've got dinoflagellate tripos on the left with its three horns on the right. And I stumble over this one. That larger one is called Cossinodiscus. And the ones that looked like a bracelet to me and railroad tracks to Mark are Thalassiocera. So, and it was really fun looking at these on the boat because there was motion and they were jiggling, and it was a real trip to get photographs of them. But ice is also something that we see out there. And maybe we see more, I don't know, because I have not had, a lifetime history in Southeast Alaska. It's going to say as a result of global warming. But here's an iceberg out on the channel. The birds are using it as a new vantage point, and they must have some special chemistry that keeps their feet from freezing when they stand on ice like that. Um, I love the abstract patterns. This is iceberg detail. For those who don't know, as ice compresses over the ages, the air gets squeezed out. So as it moves through narrow slots in the mountains, and when the air is squeezed out, the ice becomes very blue. So when you see blue ice like this, it means it's quite old ice. And we talk about we talk about glaciers carving mountains. And here is a little reminder of that with this small block of rock in one of these icebergs out on the channel. This summer, we actually got to see a bit of history being made. We started our voyage on the 15th of August. On the 10th, there was a significant landslide above the toe of the South Sawyer Glacier. And my understanding is that as the glaciers recede, which they are all doing, the land becomes destabilized and is more prone to these landslides. And so there was a landslide into the waters of Tracy Arm. This is south of Juneau, off the Stevens Passage, and it produced a tsunami on the 10th. And as it came down, it, ripped out trees that were growing on the side of the mountain, and then the tsunami ripped up more trees. There's something called dirty ice or dirty glaciers, which I've seen in the Arctic, in Norway, where as the glacier moves through over the landscape, it picks up bits of glacial moraine of the rock and incorporates it into the glacier itself. That's not what's happening here. I'm pretty certain what we're seeing is would have been clean ice, but the landslide dumped sediment onto it and made it dirty from the outside. On the bottom insert, there's a more bit of the white ice with the dirt on top of it and a completely shredded tree that, probably got ripped up by the tsunami. And as we're nearing the end here, if you're flying out of Juneau and you're heading south, sit on the left side of the plane. We got to see the Mendenhall Glacier from the air, and you can see continuing glaciers up beyond it, and the peaks that extend for quite a long ways. There's sort of a lake that's formed, which is like the beginning of that river where we saw the first sow, no, maybe the second sow, with her three cubs. And needless to say, the glacier has been receding, but it's spectacular view from the air. And last year there was another like small lake that had formed from melt and then finally broke through, and it flooded a lot of the houses downstream. This year they were expecting the same thing to happen pretty much on the day that we were flying. And they had sandbags and they took some measures, and so there was no damage. And the airport was right downstream, and that was okay as well. A few years ago, Mark took me up in his single engine Cessna, and we flew over the Mendenhall, and it was just a most amazing experience for me. I feel really fortunate to get an up close look of what a glacier and the movement you can see of it is. And this next image, I hope you can't always hear what my slides are saying, my videos, but this orange spot here, if you were to look close, is actually a portable geodesic dome. And while this looks like a flat image, that's actually a rock vertical wall on the right. And just above this dome is a helicopter. And I want to say small, but I think that's a normal size helicopter just to give you a sense of scale of how, how large everything is and how far up we actually are. Of course, I'm shooting with a telephoto lens. We think this was a researcher or researchers who were taking measurements out on the ice, but if you want to see, see what the glacier looks like from the air, that's certainly a possibility because there are fleets of helicopters that fly over it. Juneau is a huge cruise ship port, and there may be 5 cruise ships in at a time, with 2,000 to 7,000, maybe 10,000 passengers apiece. They do lots of whale watching just north of Juneau. We avoid that area. There are far too many boats. We don't want to contribute to the stress on the whales. And people can, fly in the helicopters and get a bird's eye view of the glacier, but they can also go sledding on the ice. And I understand the helicopters will fly in the sled dogs at the beginning of the season, put them down on the ice, bring in, habit accommodations for their keepers and the dogs. And yes, it's tourism at its strangest. So we're on our way to finishing up as we continue to fly south from Juneau to Seattle. I was surprised it was glaciers for mile after mile after mile. And the insert on the left is glacial meltwater coming into the main channel. You can see an island there, get a sense of scale, and that's a boat wake off on the right. And with that, I want to thank everyone for your attention. And a little pitch here at the end. Susan mentioned the book Wild Monterey Bay, which Caitlin Taylor and I co-edited. We also are in the book, and we interviewed 40 people from their most memorable wildlife encounters on Monterey Bay. And it include people like Ted Cheeseman, who was out there a day I was when 100 whales were present, back in when the blob was offshore. Includes various researchers who've got stories about whales and all kinds of whales and nudibranchs and dolphins and octopus gardens and bioluminescence and so much more. Anyways, I have signed copies available. You can order them directly from me. Susan said that, told you about the first in-person gathering that ACS San Francisco chapter is going to have. I plan to be there. I'll have books with me. You can order from Amazon or ask your local bookstore to carry it. And I was going to tell you something else, which is that if you are interested in joining me on a trip to Southeast Alaska, you can contact me about that as well. And any questions?
Yeah, I think we already have somebody that's interested in that trip. So
I think there are a few people on this, on the Zoom this evening. I know Ted said he was going to be here. I didn't mention he and his people joined us for one of the weeks in 2021 when we were doing research. I know you were there, Susan and Joanne, and yeah, so.
yeah, it's great. It is really a treat. Well, yeah, this has been great. So I think we have some questions, right, Feruze?
Oh, absolutely. So let me start with first question. Were the trips on commercial vessel and which group? I think it's again regarding the travel arrangements.
The first trip I did was on the Northern Song, which is a commercial vessel. Dennis Rogers sold it. It's being operated by somebody else at this point in time. Beautiful vessel. Dennis once said, I don't think there's any mahogany left in Honduras. It's all on this boat. And I know when he ran the trips, and the trip I was on, he had Adam Pack join us. And Adam, who, if you don't know, is a wonderful humpback whale researcher in Hawaii. And he had, we did a lot of whale ID, and he would give lectures every night. The glacier seal that I go out on does not offer commercial trips. Mark runs trips for film crews, for researchers, and has been doing private charters with me. So that's the commercial trip. I don't think of it that way. I think of it more as a family thing. We only take 6 passengers, and it's a very intimate experience.
Thank you. That makes sense. And are you seeing more entanglements and also disentanglements actions up there?
I have not seen any myself, but um, and Fred Sharp is involved in the disentanglement team up there, and I know that periodically he gets called out. So they do have entanglement. We did see this year for the first time, we saw a dead calf, and this is just south of Juneau. They had pulled it up on the shore, and I'm not sure. Initially, when we saw it, we went by, it had these huge slices in it, and we thought, oh my goodness, some enormous ship must have, done serious damage to the calf. And thankfully, before we did anything with that knowledge, we found out that that was from a necropsy that had been done. So I'm not sure. I know that, ships, they do have ship strike issues up there, and they do have some entanglement, but I've not seen any entangled whales. And I don't recall seeing as many entanglement scars on the whales I've seen there as we have down here.
Yeah, that's a good news. So, what's the difference between a tail throw and tail lob?
Good question. I did not show a picture of a tail lob, so you'll have to see my tail right here. But a tail lob, the whale is kind of head down, and it's in slow motion on video. Um, and it just raises and slaps its tail to the surface. A tail throw is like a tail breach. So the whale has to use its pec fins and push itself and then throw its tail to the side. And I did have one slide of a tail throw. So it's much more dramatic. And sometimes, there's so much we don't know about whale behavior. I'm not sure why they do tail lobs. I know that we often see out on the Silver Bank, it's the breeding grounds, we'll see calves tail lobbing with their moms. In fact, they just had a mother calf pair in Monterey yesterday. They were both practicing. A lot of these behaviors certainly for the young ones help increase myoglobin in the blood, which is necessary for carrying oxygen, I should say myoglobin in the muscle, like hemoglobin in the blood, which enables them to, swim longer distances, maybe hold their breath more. I'm not sure. But tail throws sometimes are a sign of annoyance. Like the calf has strayed too far, mom is liable to do this tail throw and get back here. Or if a whale's irritated by maybe sea lions or another whale, they may do that.
I see. So, regarding the contact calls, are they audible above the water?
So I'm the wrong person to ask about that because I can't hear very well at all. But I think the answer is no. So there are other calls, and Fred is trying to study that right now that he calls aerial sound. I shouldn't say calls, aerial sounds. And I've heard this once in Monterey Bay, but I've heard it quite a bit in Alaska where whales are feeding and they come up and they're, breathing, they're catching their breath, and they're sort of dispersing momentarily because maybe, they've just depleted this bait ball, or they're allowing the bait ball to coalesce again, and the whale honks or trumpets. Those are as aerial sounds. They're very audible from the air, but the contact calls generally are not.
I see. Yeah. Um, can you describe a trap feeding and do humpbacks use this strategy?
Trap feeding. Well,
Yeah.
that's what that one whale by the lighthouse looked like it was doing. And I don't know much about trap feeding because I've never seen it myself. I've seen images, video of whales in, Asia where the whale opens its mouth and just sort of leaves its jaw open for fish to swim in. That's what it looked like that whale was doing with the juvenile herring. And I can only tell you from what I observed. I didn't see fish swimming in. I presumed they were. As I said, it was really actually very funny. There were a number of us at the lighthouse that summer, maybe 8 or 9. Fred was there, his brother was there. There was a young student who was doing research. We had hydrophones in the water, etc. And then there were a couple of mothers and their teenage daughters. And we decided we wanted to find out what this whale was feeding on. So we created nets from potato sacks and colanders and whatnot. And this one team went out and they used a strategy that's called kick feeding, which is they took a stick and they slapped it on the surface of the water, stunned one of these fish and snagged it in their net, and it was a juvenile herring.
Oh,
Hey,
wonderful.
put it back in the water afterwards.
So this is, I think, our last question, and it's with regards to spot treatment of humpbacks rubbing on kelp. Did you associate kelp with crab lines that attract whales, thinking it is kelp leading to entanglements?
Okay, I'm not sure I
Oh, this
complete.
is Jody. This was when you kind of talked about the spa treatment,
Yes,
the humpbacks rubbing up against the kelp.
yes.
And then I think you made a comment that the kelp, it was a clarification. Were you associating the kelp with crab lines, for instance, which could, confuse the whales thinking it was kelp? It was just,
Let's put it this way. I'm not sure that this is a scientific statement.
yeah,
Um, I know people have talked about it that, whales will play in kelp, and kelp, has can have long strands, and it breaks, and it's not attached to 300-pound, crab traps. In fact, probably if it's attached to a holdfast, the whale's not going to be near it because the kelp that they're playing with is usually, ripped free and it's out on the surface. Um, and I don't know if that has anything to do with them getting entangled. My guess is it probably has very little to do with it. That entanglement is more a matter of the whales are hard at work feeding in an area where fishing line or crab traps have been set, and they just inadvertently get caught in them. And unfortunately, they can get entangled in all sorts of things. They can get entangled in gill nets, that they swim into them, they can't see them, they don't know they're there. I don't think, I've seen killer whales do things like play with all kinds of stuff, including lines, but they tend to be pretty savvy about that and they don't get entangled nearly to the extent that humpbacks do. And I know that in Monterey Bay right now, NOAA I don't know if it's NOAA, I guess it is NOAA, has extended the moratorium on commercial crab traps. They're not going to open by the 15th, which is they're supposed to, because there's still too many whales in the bay. And apparently the recreational fishers who might have been able to, crab fishers who are able to continue, are not going to do so because there's domoic acid, and that makes the crabs potentially poisonous.
right. Yeah, it's all been delayed, right? I mean, all of San Francisco area too.
Exactly. And they're working, and they've been working on this for a while to come up with, I mean, there are alternatives, known as pop-up, traps or ropeless traps, which autocorrect always wants to call hopeless traps, and that's wrong because they actually provide hope, where, the traps are set. And right now, whether any kind of fish trap, the line comes up to the surface and there's a, series of buoys hoping it there so that the fisher, crab fisher person knows where to find the traps and come back and then just pulls them up from the, with the line. And the problem is you've got this line hanging there, and for the whale to run into because they can't really see it, and they're mostly cueing off of auditory cues or tactile cues and things. And so these new types that have been developed have, maybe a flotation, and you can use a trigger to release it. And they're working out the kinks on that. There are a variety of concerns. some of the regulatory agencies were concerned, could people put the traps in areas that they're not supposed to since they can't see them, and other things. But they're getting closer, and they're being used experimentally. So hopefully, we'll see a lot less entanglement.
Let's hope so. Yeah. I think that might be something that Kathy George will cover in the talk portion of our November 22nd afternoon event.
And
Uh,
I'm sure I'll have more current information than I have.
Yeah.
Susan, before we leave, our audience wants to learn about the future Inside Passage trips. I think this is for Jodi. If there is any more trips like this where you invite passengers, they want to hear about that. And the second one is here in detail information about our in-person event.
So what I will say about that is, these are not done like, most trips where there's a great big website and you sign up in advance and, it's an ongoing, it's dependent on Mark's availability. He has a day job, he's the guy who does lots of work on the engines of the other boats that are, out there, and so he uses this boat, as I said, maybe several times a season. Some of that is taking his family, his grandkids out, film crews, researchers, and we've started doing these charters. And we just did one this year. We did two the year before. And it will be a matter of seeing what Mark's schedule looks like next year. So if anybody's interested, email me, and I'll put you on the waiting list. And when I've got more information, like, are we going to be doing it? What are the dates? What the cost is, and then we go from there.
And it's usually in August, right, Jodi?
Right, exactly. Thank
Yeah.
you.
And Jodi's email is it Jodi F at
Yeah, can I
okay.
do this? Uh-oh,
Oh, you could go to you had that on your last slide, maybe.
I
Yeah.
know, but it just went dark.
End of slideshow. Maybe go back one or some if you
I
had it on there.
No, it's not.
Oh,
There we go.
oh,
Okay.
there it is. Yeah.
I don't know how I got out of
Jodi Fredi. So the first few letters of your last name at AOL.com.
the first 5 letters of my last name.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, that is such a good book. I love that book. I read
okay.
that. The thing about that book is you can just open it up anywhere and you're going to get a really good story.
Yeah, and what I didn't say is that what we also did, we sat people down in front of a camera, and Caitlin and I said, just start talking, tell us your most memorable encounter, and we'll keep our mouths shut. Sometimes we had to, you know, do this so we weren't laughing, and let the camera roll, and then I would also interview them and ask them to tell a little bit about how they ended up in Monterey Bay in the first place. And, Jacques Cousteau figured in a lot of people's, early dreams. The stories were all different and individual. And then there's a photograph of each person. And the book is loaded with a lot of my photographs. I didn't get to see the octopus garden down, at the base of or down low on a seamount. So, those are other photos. And yeah, the whale on the front is named Louise. She's a regular in Monterey Bay. And yeah, that's fun, and then we did a little bit of a discussion about Monterey Bay and its history and the sanctuary aspect of it. And we do quote Jane Goodall, dear Jane Goodall, who has always
Yeah.
talked about the importance of storytelling. So
Yes, who left us
yeah,
uh, this earlier this month, actually. Yeah. Well, I guess I guess that does it for now, Jodi, but it's just always a treat to have you and your amazing photos. Oh, and I wanted to mention that I didn't know what that term meant when you said dissociation, dissociation event, but it was basically the whales had come together, they were feeding, and then they were essentially saying goodbye to each other. That was such an amazing video.
It was an amazing event. I mean, it was just like, what?
And who termed it dissociation, or is it just using the word?
Yeah, that's what that's what I learned from people who have observed this more often in Alaska.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, it was amazing. What it makes me think of, and I didn't see it, so I'm guessing that it didn't look quite the same. But a number of years back, there was an earthquake, I think, over by Hollister. And Mbari, Monterey Bay Aquarium Research Institute has this hydrophone array down on the Mars platform and near the canyon in the center of the bay. And they registered the earthquake on that hydrophone. And people who were out whale watching that day, of course, didn't feel the earthquake because they're on the water, but they noticed that all the whales started breaching at the same time.
Yeah.
And which was quite remarkable to me. We weren't having an earthquake in Alaska, but these whales, and I cut the video short, but they continued to. There were probably some tail lobs in there, and some more breaching, and just a little celebration, a goodbye, and it's possible that I've always thought that they can use these surface activity as a communication, three
Yeah.
breaches and, two tail lobs and four pec slaps mean something. And I don't know.
Hey, yes, exactly. Yes. Anyway. All right. Well, with that, thanks again, Jodi, and let's leave it as to be continued.
All right. Thank you, Susan and Firuz and everybody else and all the whales.
Everyone. And oh, by the way, and November 18th will be our last presentation, and it's Tom Jefferson, who we gave a research grant to, and it's on Dall's porpoises.
Oh, great.
Yeah, so it should be really good. And it's the Tuesday before the week of Thanksgiving.
Okay.
So
Well, hope to
they,
catch that
yeah,
because
definitely.
you can always learn more about Doll's purposes.
Yeah, and I was going to see if he had maybe contacted you from, because he part of his research was, it's really been about the decrease in sightings and
Oh,
so what's going on. So yeah, it's going to be a good talk and they're amazing to see. I'm so happy I was lucky enough to see them at the Farallons.
yeah, that's interesting because I haven't seen any recently, but then I haven't been out as much as I used to be.
Yeah,
So,
yeah. All right. Okay. Happy
thank
Halloween, everyone. Stay safe. See you in November.
All right.
Okay,
Thank
bye-bye.
you. Good night.